Hello, I'm Sam Aquillano. Welcome to Business Design School, where we learn to master the art of business design together. Business design is a strategic approach that focuses on the holistic design and organization of a business to create value, solve problems, and meet the needs of customers and stakeholders. Today, we have a special conversation to dive into a strategic approach to looking at the design of finance and accounting. This guy makes finance and accounting fun. I'm excited. I'm super excited. So we're joined by Jamie Odegaard. Jamie has paved an untraditional path from advertising to carpenter to CEO for private equity. He's now the CEO of Aardvark, a financial strategy studio for the creative industry. They help owners build a more successful business around the work that they love. Among other things, Aardvark is a fractional finance department, something I'm excited to learn more about. But as they say, it's kind of like your cool new friend that happens to give expert financial advice and make your accounting a breeze. Like, don't we all need that? Jamie loves helping small business owners understand the strategic financial insights that lead to success. Welcome, Jamie. It's so great to chat with you.
Thanks, Sam. That's a warm and generous introduction.
Oh, I love what you all do. Like when I think about finance, I'm like, help. So when I learned about your company and what you guys do, I was just like, oh yeah, we got to chat more.
Cool.
So
Well, yeah,
why don't we start there? Yeah, you guys are doing cool stuff. I'd love to learn more about you, like your background, and I love a good origin story. So like, what was the
sure.
spark that like we have to make Aardvark happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, I think the origin story is rooted in a lot of um, like long suffering, hard lessons learned, I would say. So I don't have a formal financial background. I sort of came into this world like in a really circuitous way, but also having sort of learned the hard way, like what's important for small business. And over the last 10 years of my career, I've been running small businesses for owners. And I would say like the level of financial acumen um, on the ownership level, and also anybody who's involved in running a small business that's not an owner, it's highly variable. So I've run businesses for owners that didn't have any financial perspective other than evaluating like the size of their bank account, and
Mm-hmm.
they ran like a really successful business doing that.
That's one metric, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it has a lot of limitations, but I think that the thing that's like important to recognize is that like you can sort of like having a successful business and being responsible financially like they're not part and parcel. So you can have one without the other. It's just that
Mm-hmm.
if you sort of operate things on a cleaner basis from a financial point of view, it sort of unlocks more opportunities than you're probably allowing yourself to experience if you didn't have that. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's rewarding about the work that we do. And the origin of Aardvark in particular was I was coming off of a stint working for like a very sophisticated ownership group from a financial perspective, and I learned a lot. And when I left that work, I was just talking to other friends of mine that were running businesses, and it was very like normal. And I think it was very easy for me to like start to explain the power of these financial concepts to them in a way that like hadn't been for me previously. And I think like just a couple of really basic ideas set off a lot of possibility for these businesses. And we just felt like that represented a larger opportunity rather than just like,
Mm-hmm.
having conversations with friends. So that's kind of why we developed it.
Yeah, like actually turn it into a business. That's
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think like a lot of in the space of sort of studios or film production companies, I think a lot of people got into the business because they really like making the work and
mm-hmm.
producing the work, and are almost like accidental business owners in some
Yeah.
respects. And so I think for that group, there's just a lot of there's a lot of potential to be revealed, like as they sort of come into exposure with some of these concepts.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned a couple of them, film studios, agencies. Like, what types of companies are you mostly chatting with, and
Yeah.
like what patterns are you seeing across them?
Yeah. So we've sort of so small agencies and film production studios are the largest two cohorts, but I think the common thread for everybody that we engage with is that usually there's like a project based accounting structure to their business,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like they're winning kind of like their business is comprised of winning large projects. Sometimes not so large, but like the money comes in like in chunks through winning projects, through winning work, right? Whether it's like brand work for an agency, or it's like corporate work or spot work for a film production company. So the commonality is that these companies have to manage their finances in the same way,
Right.
and so that's kind of how we've come into it, and that's how we've been able to, the more similar the businesses are that you work with, the more value you're able to provide, because like
Right.
an epiphany for one business translates into value that you can translate to other businesses that you work with. So it's
Yeah.
been helpful
I
in that way.
bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a former founder and runner of a creative business, I can think of a few of these, but I'm curious, like looking across, like with that, like project based accounting and like doing business development, and what keeps these folks up at night? Like, what are
Mm,
they, and
yeah.
maybe what are they worried about versus like more of a traditional, well, all businesses are creative, but like, what are these
Sure.
creative businesses founders like worrying about?
Yeah. Well, it's a timely question. I would say like right now they're mostly worrying about things that like we can't control, which is like business development. So that's
Yeah.
like, it's hard to be an advocate for a business that you can't like help directly in that respect. And
Hmm.
so that's just the top of the funnel, like the revenue piece that like those businesses need to sort of own and continually develop. But I think downstream of that is cash management is like right behind that. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're earning money on a project basis, like the revenues come in a very like lumpy, inconsistent
Yeah.
way. And
Mm-hmm.
so managing that inflow has a couple of different components. There's like a profitability component, and then there's the actual like timing and cash management component. And those two, if they're not clarified for the business, can feel, well, they result in the same issue, which is like not enough cash in the business.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's if you're not clarifying your perspective on profitability and like how and the cash flows of the business, then it's hard to like know what the culprit is. Like it's hard to know if you're just not pricing your work correctly, and like you're breaking even, or if you're just like not getting payment in timely enough fashion, or you're paying people too
Mm-hmm.
quickly, all those kinds of things. So
Right. That delicate
that's
balance.
like that's a big thing for us, I would say. Like, and either depending on like which path you like, which thread you pull, you unlock insights about like pricing and efficiency, with like how effectively you're producing the work. And again, that's like something that creatives probably don't prefer to think about, because like
Right.
the method of making the thing has some like intrinsic inefficiencies with it, right? If you think about
Right.
just like an artist, like in an artist process, like they probably don't love to have to like filter through an efficiency lens if they're making something that they're like very proud of from an artistic standpoint.
Right. Yeah.
But when you're running a business and you have to pay payroll and you have to provide for your own family, you're sort of like forced
Mm-hmm.
into thinking about those things a little bit. And even though you're forced to confront them, it doesn't make you have to like make a choice for efficiency. It just, you have to know what you're choosing. That's the sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
best possible thing. So it's like yeah, we can decide to spend, 20 extra hours like tweaking this brand identity because it's like just going to sing when we do it. But we're going to do it with the knowledge that like there's going to be some, offsetting costs and
some
in a place
trade-offs.
that's going to create some difficulty maybe for another part of the business kind of thing. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, you got me thinking just how interesting it is to go from like founder, particularly creative founder, to then you have this realization that you're like, oh, I'm like the chief salesperson.
Yeah.
And then therefore I'm also the chief financial person.
Yeah.
And like those realizations aren't always fun.
Yeah. I think, in my experience, like creatives, like they like business development when it happens in sort of like an organic way. They don't like being like forced to go out and get it, because then it turns into like a different thing a little bit, but yeah, it's it's a feature of the environment right now for sure. So what we're doing a lot of is just like making sure that people are thinking about the cash that they do have in a really strategic way so that they're just sort of like doing more with that lever than they otherwise might have been aware of, in a different environment.
I love that. Yeah. And I want to talk more about the cash management in a minute, but
sure.
Give us an overview of like, so we're talking a little bit about like potential clients and like what they're thinking, like what are the services that Aardvark brings to bear to like support. Again, I can't help but think about myself as a creative founder and being like, I wish I had your phone number back then.
Well, what we, I guess the format that we prefer is just like if somebody sees us as a partner to just like own the financial responsibility of their business in terms of the way that the sort of machine works. So, obviously like we're not involved in the business development piece of it, but everything from, providing perspective about like pricing and sort of what some benchmarks should be for, profitability, what we're seeing. I mean, that's another sort of, valuable aspect about having sort of a cohort that we're servicing is that we can observe trends throughout other businesses doing the same kind of work and keep that anonymous, but still like pertinent to.
Because like, oh great, I did X amount in revenue, and I'm like happy, but I'm also like, is that good?
Yeah, exactly. And it depends, right? Like everything. I think a lot of people are like surprised how much we do. So we just we like to just own the whole thing. So that's like helping like the invoicing, we run payroll, we do all of the transactional bookkeeping. We help you manage cash. We do like some, if there are long-term projects that the business needs like more time to confront and deal with, we work on those. And, but in the meantime, we do everything that's required on a weekly basis, like paying vendors and,
nice.
So helping with like invoice management is a big one. Helping collect money if you have like challenging sort of like, AR issues. So
I know, isn't it always so great to have someone else do I always used to have someone else on my team do like the invoice.
We're very gentle.
I was the one who closed it. Gentle, but also firm.
And I think it almost doesn't matter if it's somebody other than you. That's helpful. Right, it
is. It's like, not hurt that relationship by asking for the money that you already said is mine.
And if you tell somebody that like you might be getting a call from like my CFO, that just sounds more important,
Oh, absolutely. I love that. So is that like what it means to be? I mentioned the fractional CFO, and is that like what you mean, like? Fractional CFO, like come in, kind of own that piece, so like you don't have to worry about it, but you also don't have to hire an actual CFO. Like we'll take.
Yeah, honestly, like I've struggled with the CFO term because the CFO, like the sort of the technical sort of definition of like a corporate CFO is like much more involved than what we do for a lot of businesses. Is just that
small business might not feel like they need one.
Right? Exactly. They don't really need a CFO, but they do need like a steward of their finances that's helping them think through both like the sort of blocking and tackling aspect of the business from a financial perspective, and also just like what's happening on the long-term sort of strategic basis. So I guess for all intents and purposes, like, you can plug the CFO like term in there, but what, what a CFO does for like, Fortune 1000 company and what, we do for small businesses. Like it's not the same thing, but that definition is, it's really immaterial. You just need somebody who's like, I guess the most simple way to describe it would be like having somebody in your business that's thinking about your business from like a finance forward perspective, rather than like starting from the creative perspective or the output perspective. That's like the definition that makes the most sense.
Yeah. Instead of just like reacting to, like you said, like lumpy cash flow, we're just dealing with it. And we struggle, but we're just going, versus like, here's a real strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot being an owner of a small business is like it's a lonely post, so like having a partner that has a perspective and like a strength that is distinct from yours, that's a helpful format in any business, and
do you even get into like, it's almost like financial therapy, right? Like, I imagine like sometimes you're chatting with these owners and you're just like, sit on the couch, lay back and let Jamie hear your troubles.
I think the reality is like, math is very like clarifying, right? And so like the finances of a small business, like the problem is always like not easy. Sorry. The problem is always easy to determine, it's like, there's only like a few like sort of moving parts that would be responsible for driving an outcome of a small business. You could probably like reduce it to like 4 items, and so making the determination about like what the issue is with your business is like the simple part. It's like, it's what you do with that information, how that information makes you feel as an owner is like, that's the tricky part, and like how to sort of like translate that into execution. So like, for instance, like if you win a project, that's like not especially profitable, and it like coincides with like a raise that you promised, like a team member that's like key to producing that work, like you're going to have some like margin compression, like in that scenario. I even hate that I just used the word margin compression, because it's like such a finance like word,
I'm so glad like, you did.
So what I meant to say is like, it's going to reduce your profitability, right? Margin compression is like finance speak. That like is not important to most business owners. It's not that
I'm here for it
usually. yeah. So anyway, but that's like a real live like circumstance, right? Where it's like, you've had somebody that's been like working hard, they've been like putting in extra work, they've been like really demonstrating a commitment to your business, and like you want to give them a raise, and maybe you do, but like I say, it coincides with like a project that's not particularly profitable. So like, so what are you going to do with that? So like the math is clear. Like there you can either like not give the person the raise, or you can give them the raise. Like it's a pretty like binary choice. Like they're going to have different like outcomes for the business, right? So like the way that feels for a business owner is brutal, but like the math is easy. You're either adding or you're subtracting. So so to your point about therapy, like a lot of it is like making the determination from a mathematical standpoint, and then like talking to the business owner about like, okay, like here are the sort of options that we have to consider the circumstance and like what feels right, and then, maybe exploring something that wasn't like imminently obvious, comes
right. Yeah. Gets you to better decision spaces.
Well. Yeah.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah. Let's get more into the I'm like so curious, like how you actually then like work with clients. Like what's your process? Like I'm a new client, I'm coming in, I've got some of the challenges we just talked about. Like, how do you get started and roll them through your process?
So typically it starts like on the bookkeeping side of things. So like whether it's the business is usually in like QuickBooks Online or Xero. So we take on the QuickBooks file, and as part of like the onboarding process, and then we usually spend like a decent amount of time like understanding the business like through that lens, just by asking questions like, why is like, why is this balance in this account? Like, what happened here? This doesn't make sense. Like, why does it say that like a bank owes you $2,000? Like, banks don't owe people money. Like, just trying to figure out like what some of the inputs are, and how they're represented in the financials is like typically, but in concert with like dialogue, right? It's not, we can't just like
Yeah.
perceive everything without like context. So, but usually that's the starting point, because like we're taking that file on, like that's our sort of responsibility. So we like need to make sure that makes sense. But then from there, and through conversations with the owner about like how things work, how they're running their business, we typically make some changes to the chart of accounts. And like those, for everybody's reference, are just like the accounts that comprise the profit and loss statement, which is the statement, the financial statement that most business owners look at most frequently. And so a lot of times, like the relationship between income and expense for direct expenses are not like represented accurately enough to give you a perspective in how you're doing as a business. So we typically like, we'll ask the owner, is it okay if we change these things around? Here's why we're thinking about it this way. You'll be able to see these relationships a little bit more clearly. So yeah, that's typically where we start. And then more functionally, some people like will do like we'll call once a week, like for 30 minutes if it like requires that. And other people we just talk to like twice a month. One call will be like a sort of a review of the financial performance of the previous month. And then the other call will be like more strategic in nature about other things we're trying to accomplish with the business.
Nice. I think some people might think like finance is finance, accounting is accounting. Like,
Yeah.
are you customizing for, like, I really think every business is like a totally unique snowflake, right? Even though there are accounting principles, but like, are you customizing based on what you're hearing? Like, how is that aligning to like those unique businesses?
I think where we're a little bit different is like the operational perspective that we infuse into certainly like the accounting aspect of it. That's really rare. And so like it's not like just recognizing like a transaction and labeling it as like to the appropriate sort of like expense or revenue category is not like a rarefied skill set. But like if you're asking questions about like why that's taking place and making a shift about how to more effectively demonstrate like what the assembled story will look like as a function of like how the finances are being represented on the financial statements, like that's a little bit of an unusual take, I would say. And like one that you probably have to like pay more for like if you were running a large company and you wanted that kind of benefit, like from like your accounting team, you would have to hire like a controller or somebody like a little bit more senior to represent that perspective. So I think to be able to give that to like a small business owner is pretty unusual.
That's pretty great.
And good,
the story, right? That's the story behind the numbers that like is going to help you
exactly.
make better decisions.
I think the reason that finance like feels so dry to a lot of people is because like there's a disconnect between like the story, like the storytelling potential of those documents and like what is represented transactionally without any like thought, and like there's a big gap there.
Yeah, like it's in there, right? I was always told like when I was getting my MBA, like, I was running my business, my like accounting professor was like, eventually you'll feel the numbers. And I was like, well, that's great. But then like 10 years in, I was like, okay, I'm starting to feel, it was like the force. I was like, okay, I understand like if this happens, but like, it sounds like some of the stuff you're doing, storytelling is like accelerating that for folks versus like spend a decade. Well, yeah, you're going to start to feel.
Hopefully. Yeah. I mean, once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the good part, but sometimes, it took me a long time to really like have, an appreciation for like what these documents could do if they're like designed in the right way and sort of like presented in the right way. I think
I hear that. I want to get specific and maybe get back to that profit and loss statement, because when I ran the design museum, we were finding that like we were pulling in certain kinds of revenue from like a sponsor, and then that it was just somehow vanishing. you know. And on our P&L, we're like, where's this money going? We ended up analyzing it and splitting out our P&L into two like big chunks. We had like from the expense side, we had our like operational expenses, right? Those are just going to happen
Yep.
whether we do projects or not.
Sure.
And then our program expenses. And then we did that on the flip side, on the revenue side, we're like, what revenue are we bringing in that's unattached to any
Yeah.
project, right?
Sure.
Donations, philanthropy, grants. And then we looked at what we're bringing in from a program standpoint. And that was like so clarifying
Yeah.
to see that we were not bringing in enough non-attached money. Like we needed more money just to fund operations. We
Yeah.
were taking the small margins from our programs and just throwing it at operations and hoping for the best. And it's so like, it seems so simple now when I look back, like we literally just took the table and like
Yeah.
split it from 2 sections to 4.
Yeah.
But it changed how me, the board, the team like thought
Yeah.
about the business. So like, how do you design a P&L? I mean, it's such an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, your example is very similar to what we do, but so like one sort of common feature of a lot of small businesses, like when you're starting a business, like a lot of times what happens is like you propose like a certain service, you're like, I build websites, you know, and then the person will be like, well, your client or the next client might be like, well, can you do SEO? And you're like a small business and you're like, sure, you know,
of course,
like I'll figure it out, you know. And before you know it, you could have like 8 different like services that you sort of provide unknowingly, right? You think of yourself as like a website person, but you like, you know, sell tickets to the parade, like
seriously,
when you need the money or whatever. So yeah, the first thing, so starting at the top of the income statement, like in the revenue, we clarify like the different like revenue, the different like income accounts, so that you can see like, oh, you know, we're getting $100,000 for building websites, you know, we're getting only, oh man, we're like only we have $15,000 a year in SEO work, but like we've been representing ourselves as like an SEO provider, whatever it is. So like that's the first sort of like part of point of clarification is, you know, what do we do and how much of it do we do, you know? So so it's usually like breaking like one like total income. It's usually like breaking like one line into like 4, you know, to clarify what it is the business does. And then the next sort of group down are the direct costs, and we're clarifying those as well, right? So we're saying like what expenses in your business like service those income lines, so that you know that like, you know, because everything correspondingly, like, you know, a lot of times like things are rolled up into like one income line, while the same thing can happen on the expense side. It's just like expenses, you know, $100,000. Well, it's like,
which tells you nothing.
$100,000, like $100,000 of like fax machines, or like, you know, people, or, you know, so we break all that up so that it's clear, like that, like, oh, for $15,000 of SEO income, it costs us $7,000 of like expense through our, you know, subcontractor that we pay to like, you know, deliver that service, you know. So pretty clearly you can see the relationship between income and expense in terms of like what we're always trying to clarify is like, how much does it cost you to produce the thing that you sell? Like that is the line. How much does it cost to produce the thing that you sell? So like, are you spending 50 cents for every dollar that comes in, or are you spending 75 cents, or are you spending 25 cents? Like all of those, all of those outcomes have wide ranging implications for how you should approach your business. And a lot of businesses aren't even running with that kind of clarity, right? They're just like, it's all happening in one group. Again, they could be fantastically profitable businesses, but they might not be, and you wouldn't be able to discern like why you are the way you are, you know? So like if you had a fantastically profitable business that only had like 2 lines or like 4 lines expressed on your income statement, like you wouldn't know which segment to lean into to like amplify your profitability, you know, which
or you might be like worrying about XYZ, and that clarity that you could get is going to like just make you, you know, just breathe.
Totally.
I love that.
So that's the first. And then, you know, as you mentioned, like after direct expenses, we're trying to figure out operating expenses. And so between those 3, that really like gives you the full picture of like what's happening. Well, not the full picture, but it gives you the P&L perspective of what's happening in the business.
Yeah, I love that, especially because again, like even if you have your P&L, like overall, like that's great, that's my business, but be able to look at it from like a project, to like to start to zoom in
Yeah.
and zoom in at different like categorizations. Like, oh, I want to look at it from a project standpoint. Oh, I want to look at it from a capability
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, or
Yeah.
even I want to look at it from like this team, like and what
Yeah.
they're doing. Like that's when you get to some like the stories that just help you make better versus going by like thumb in the wind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feel like you can get real stories from that information if you structure it
Yeah.
correctly.
It's all about sort of like directional heading, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's never the journey is never like a function of like, oh, we take this mess and like we create like the perfect, sort of
Right.
out like format. It's just about like, let's just make it a little bit better than what it is. And then we just like keep
Mm-hmm.
improving on that. So
Yeah.
for instance, like the thing that's going to give you like, if you're a project based business that has like labor as your primary expense, then like keeping track of that time,
Mm-hmm.
the time it takes that labor to produce the work is like, that's kind of the holy grail. That's going to give you your
That's a
most
lever.
precise view on how efficiently you're performing. But a lot of
Mm-hmm.
businesses don't have that. And so a lot of times we just work to approximate that. We'll just say, okay, like deploying like time tracking is like, that's a big project for a small business. Like
Yeah.
somebody has to do that. It takes work. So like, let's not do that. But what's the next best thing we can do? And then we'll
Yeah.
do that,
Can we do FTEs, percentage, of
Right.
time? Like,
Exactly.
I think something's better
Exactly.
than nothing for
Totally.
sure.
Totally. Yeah.
I love what you just said too about iterating, because I also think like folks think, and I might have been here too, like, QuickBooks gives me my P&L and that's that.
Yeah.
But you can design these things and iterate. Like, okay, we learned that, speak again for the museum, we were looking at things like quarterly
Mm-hmm.
from like a high level, and that just wasn't, especially in our early days when we're just sort of like,
Yeah.
and we iterated. We said, all right, we're going to do this monthly, and we're going to like really look month to month and start like tracking, like what did we do differently this month that got us more members or
Yeah.
more revenue in this. And that, again, those conversations never would have happened
Yeah.
if we hadn't iterated on like how we report and look at
Yeah.
the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
love that. That's so
Yeah.
good.
Small
It's all
business
design.
is such a like it's hard not to be affected by everything that you experience if you're running a small business and having some other kind of grounding element. And so
Mm-hmm.
like finance being the one that is like most pertinent from my point of view, having like a grounding element that's like not your own experience or that's like devoid
Yes.
of like your emotional influence is like
Yeah, it's
an incredibly helpful partner.
numbers.
Yeah.
I think I told
Yeah.
you too. I told my dad once when I was going to design that design shapes the world, and he was like,
Yeah.
actually, and he's a CFO. He was like, Sam,
Right.
finance shapes the world, and I was like,
Yeah.
darn it.
Yeah.
A decade later, I was like, you're right, Dad.
Right. Yeah.
Dispassionate numbers, but again, through a human lens that tell a story that you can action on, iterate on.
Yeah.
Love
And
it.
even if you
So
don't
that
want to,
okay.
even if you don't want to capitulate to the numerical perspective, like it's a helpful foil, it's a helpful like
Yeah.
additional perspective, so
Mm-hmm.
that's,
Yeah, it gives you that.
yeah,
You might be telling yourself one story, and the numbers are going to tell
exactly.
you
Yeah,
something else.
totally.
We talked a little about cash management, so I want to get into that because that was always the thing. I hear it from small businesses that I mentor. I certainly felt it. Like cash flow was always just like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's. I felt this way at a time. I think other small business owners do too. That like cash flow just sort of like happens to you. Right? It's
Right.
just something that like occurs.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in talking to you and learning more about your work, and of course just getting more into my business, like you can design cash management, at least strategies. Maybe you could talk
Definitely.
a little bit about like how you
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. So cash is just like cash management and cash flow is like, it's largely, well, it's driven by two things. It's driven by the profitability, and it's driven by like the timing of like the money coming in and out of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's interesting. You can have like a relatively modest profit margin in your business and still manage cash effectively. If you're losing money, your ability to manage cash effectively is going to be finite because you're going to run out of the thing, of the like the very
manage
fuel
itself
that you need. But you can fake it for a long time. Like you can, anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but yeah, I think like the thing that where we start is just by evaluating like the profitability piece of it. So like, what could this look like? What could cash management look like? And then the other aspect of having like an effective strategy for managing cash is, first of all, like seeing it on like a spreadsheet of just sort of like knowing, just being able to look ahead. I mean, that's the whole thing. When it feels like it's happening to you, it's like you don't have any forward looking perspective, so like, and that's, I think the thing that's brutal about that is like most small business owners do operate on that basis. And it's like, that's a very hard way to live, just because like you kind of feel hunted down,
Totally.
So putting it all on a paper and designing like a projection model for what cash is going to look like over the next, months, 3 months or 6 months, it's hard to go out much more than that, but just like to keep it pertinent, just like sort of a 3-month look is very stabilizing for small business owners. And then owners like generate behaviors that reflect the way they like to sort of think about things, and those aren't always like the most conducive to like an effective cash management strategy. So an example would be like if you pay people on a weekly basis, you might like the idea of doing that, or like paying vendors very quickly, right? Like all of those things might reflect your sort of worldview on how you like to act as a person, right?
Your
The
values.
challenge is you need to be effective in managing cash, you need to have cash to hold on to for some period of time until like more cash comes in. And a lot of times like those kinds of strategies are put people at odds with like their own sense of identity. And so like that's where it becomes like tricky territory. But it's all solvable. And it doesn't have to come down to those examples, but like those are sort of like frequent things that I observe,
Oh, I mean, I felt it. I have this like worldview values of like, if a service is done upon me or I get product, I pay like pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah, I changed that value and mindset pretty quickly as soon as I learned.
You can do that. You just need to get paid like a little bit more quickly.
Yes.
So like the cash has to be, I mean, fundamentally, like the simplest way to say it is like cash has to be coming into your business like at a faster rate than it leaves, like that's kind of the whole deal.
It's a flow, right? That's what I would call the cash flow.
Right. So, it's pretty simple when you sort of like reduce it down to like that phrase. But, if you think of it like a boat with like, a hole in it, it's just like, you need to keep up with the bailing, before faster than the water comes in. Like that's kind of, that's the metaphor. So the trick is like, if you want to sort of, make sure that your values are, reflecting, sort of like how the business operates, and you like paying people quickly and you do all of those things, then you need to make sure that your customers are paying like ahead of that a little bit, and that's really hard. It's like, a lot of times customers don't cooperate on that basis. So if you don't have that and you still want to do that, then you still want to pay people quickly, then you need some other sort of like reserve of cash that's going to help you like float through those like lean moments. And that's also really hard for small business owners to have, because, it's hard to generate the potential for that kind of float, and, that's what large businesses do. But it's hard.
I had a mentor, like, because we had that lumpy cash flow, and they were like, well, you need a reserve, to like, to float that. And I'm like, great. Yeah. How do I get that? And like, well, to get a reserve, you need to have a surplus to fill the reserve. And I was like, a surplus.
That's the again, like sort of coming back to like the drivers of these things are all sort of captured on like one hand, so your optionality can feel limited, but I think where it feels even more constrained is if like you don't have the optics to sort of know what you're dealing with, so that's kind of like, that's our primary value, I would say.
Yeah. Do you help folks or have you like figure out what that like capitalization needs to be? Like how much working capital do I need to have on
Yeah.
hand versus what I have today? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we definitely do all of that, and tax is like another piece that comes into, that's like always on a small business owner's mind. Is thinking through like, what should I be setting aside for tax? Like, how can I be
Totally. Same idea. Yeah.
efficient? How can I try to pay as little as possible? So I mean,
Of course.
we're always trying to help with that as well.
Yeah. Every little bit helps.
Yeah.
What other like either financial concepts or like metrics do you float to these business owners that sort of like open their eyes to
Yeah,
like what's possible or to their business?
I think that what I'm always like reminded by is that it's the simple concept sort of like expressed in like a new way, to me, is like the more impactful version function of what we do, right? There's never like a financial concept that's like that you can only like access in like the like institutional finance world, that like a small
Right.
business owner doesn't have, that will sort of like solve their problems. It's always just like, I think it's applying the financial, what's being represented in the financials, and like translating that into how they think about the business operationally. Like that's really like the golden territory. So it's like here's your gross margin on like the services that you produce, and like if we can increase that, you could do XYZ with your business. If it stays the way it is, like you're going to be a little bit more limited, but it's not just about like saying, oh, like congratulations, here your margin, and like that's the end of the
Yeah.
conversation. It's just like, okay, like what do you want to accomplish with the business, and like where do you feel
Yeah.
limited,
Nice.
and then like how do we make that possible with the financial
And
engineering.
that's like I love that because I was going to ask like, does founder owner like personality come into play? Because right, each owner is like caring about something differently, or there's going to be that thing that they do get that number and they're like, okay, or that concept.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it kind of depends on like maybe their like risk tolerance and like what they care about day to day.
Yeah. I think again, like I know I mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating because it's such a like common theme, that like when you're accustomed to running the business from the standpoint, from the like leading with the point of view of like what you're creating from an output side, then like reverse engineering that perspective unlocks like a whole lot of
Right.
possibilities. And then I think
Yeah, I
that's the
love that.
experience that most of our clients have, is like they're thinking about, how do I produce this work? How do I do it well? How do I make the client happy? How can I do something that looks better than like, my competitor? Like how do I maintain my artistic integrity? How do I make sure that like the culture of my business is valuable and current and reflects the way I want to live as a person? Like they're thinking about like all that stuff,
Yeah,
and I
totally.
think like where we can supplement everything that's important about what I just described with saying like, it's important that you keep your eye on the ball, like in this segment of the business, because this is going to allow you to do more of what you like to do.
Mm,
I think that's kind of like that's the
yeah,
special relationship.
that's like whew, so sweet if you can
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Can you share actually like a real case study? I don't know if you can share like actual company names, but like make it real for folks.
This is not like an acute story, um, where there's like a sort of like a champion or like a victor. But I will say, like, across all the companies that we work with, the thing that we bring to the forefront of their consciousness is this concept of gross margin. So it's
Mm,
really like your direct cost divided by your revenue. And
mm-hmm.
the reason that that's not only like an important starting point, but also like a clarifying metric for a business owner to have, is because I think typically, and we've covered some of this territory, but typically like owners of companies that are producing some kind of creative output are not inclined to think about like efficiency as a
Right.
governing metric.
Mm-hmm.
And efficiency, I almost hate using the word efficiency in this context because I feel like the wrong kinds of connotations can sort of like creep in. But I do think like fundamentally there's a difference between like produce, if you sort of stabilize the output and you say like, okay, like there's not going to be a quality difference in like the way we like present these two like websites, say, and like one
Right.
takes you like 1,000 hours to produce and the other takes like 500 hours to produce. Like having that intelligence in your business is fundamental. So
Mm-hmm.
that is like typically where a lot of the illumination, I would say, happens like in our client
Mm-hmm.
journey. Is just like
Mm-hmm.
when they start to fold in like, oh yeah, maybe we do take too long, or maybe we could like do this better, or maybe we could get the same output with like a less expensive contractor, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe we didn't need like a particular camera for that shoot because like the client's not going to be able to tell the quality difference and we can save a thousand
Right.
dollars here. And what is saving $1,000 on a line item that feels like fairly insignificant of a budget of
Yeah.
50,000? Like, what
Abstract.
does that do
Yeah.
for our business? Like, how does that trickle down and impact the result that we're looking for in other aspects of our business? So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the element of the story that um, sort of
Yeah.
unlocks a lot.
Yeah, and it's more like, I think about, like as a creative person, I mean, you yourself, like in your business, you and Jen, like you just adding that as a design, call it a design constraint or a creative constraint is also like really interesting, right? Like it's not only like do the best work possible creative work, it's do the best possible creative work that
Yeah.
can sustain this business, and the throughput that's required. That's where I also wanted to get to, of like, do you get to, I know y'all don't do like business development, but do you get to that point of like, you need to get X in business development to make some of these goals happen and get into like
Yeah.
some of the strategic
Yeah.
elements behind that because it's all connected.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think what we're seeking to do is like make the make things obvious about the business, like
Yeah.
make decisions that are like required in the business, like to make just to sort of like bring them to light, to make them obvious, so it's like when you're just running a business, when you're on the treadmill of just like running a business and you're thinking about like all of the things like, can I make payroll? Is this client happy? We've just spent like 500 hours on this website, but I don't really love the way it looks. Is the client going to be happy? Like when you're in that mode of running a business, um, not all of these, it's hard to set aside time to just ask yourself like, what am I missing or what am I not including in my perspective? And I think like having a partner that's sort of like, shining the light on, like maybe take a look at this, or like, you
Mm-hmm.
know your your costs have always been around here, and they just like, they went up or they went down, and like what happened operationally in the business to reflect
Mm-hmm.
what I'm seeing. um yeah, that seems to be where the partnership sort of shines.
I love that. Do you ever get to
Yeah.
the point like you're working with these super creative people that like, I mean, I think you and I would agree like finance can be creative. Like, do they start getting into it? Like, you can apply your creativity to this structure.
Yeah, I think I don't know, getting into it. I think like there's an appreciation like quotient for sure,
Mm. Mm, nice.
Um and a lot of times in these businesses there's like a partner that's like a little bit more
Mm.
inclined to think about business structure, and then there's a partner that's inclined to think about just like creative output.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I often it resonates like very much with like the business like thinker in the organization, or
That
they're
makes
like the most
sense.
appreciative, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I'm just curious, and you've touched on this a little bit, but like, what do you say to folks who are like they're running their business, maybe they have an accountant, like things are like fine,
Yeah.
right? Like how does your particular focus at Aardvark like help unlock like a different level of value that they don't even, again, things are fine, but how do you like unlock that like next level?
Yeah. I think if they have somebody that's helping them guide their finances through like an operational lens, then maybe things are as good as they could be. But if they don't, a lot of times like it a lot of times the sort of evolution of um, financial awareness in a small business like goes from like, I've got a business now, I need to do my taxes, like even if I'm doing like $30,000 of work a year, you need to file
Mm-hmm.
taxes if you're a small business owner. So a lot of times
Yeah.
it's like, okay, let me find a CPA that can file the taxes. And then maybe you like, triple in size, you're closer to like $100,000 a year. And now there's like some activity um, that requires like categorization, so now it's like, okay, well, let me get a bookkeeper, but I'm only doing $100,000 a year. Like, let me find the cheapest one possible.
Right.
And then like a lot of times like that person just like stays with the business for
Yeah.
like a long time. And I mean, so many times that's just like, you have somebody that has like a couple $1 million business, and like they've met somebody in like the church parking lot that's like doing their bookkeeping, and it's like
Yeah.
that person's like doing fine, but they're not like
Mm-hmm.
they're not like infusing the work that they're doing with an operational point of view, because that's just like, that's not their role. They're not tasked
Yeah,
with that,
they're just categorizing. They're not looking at chart of accounts. They're not looking at like
Yeah,
how things could be done differently. They're just.
totally. So I think
Mm-hmm.
like once you have once you feel like your business is in a place where you have some optionality with like, even if you just start to um, feel just instinctively like, I wonder if I could make a choice here, instead of like sort of choosing to go to the left, I could choose to go to the right. Like, I wonder what somebody else would think about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, where you can start to fold in a perspective that's like operational in nature. Really what it is, I think the other sort of inflection point is like, if it's not just you doing the work, that's sort of like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the journey
Game
a little
change.
bit. It's just like, if
Mm-hmm.
you're just like one person doing the work, like not too many choices you can make. It's like
Yeah.
you've got your effective like hourly rate, which is like maybe you and like a supplemental contractor. If
Mm-hmm.
that starts to turn into like you plus like 3 or 4 people, now you've got now you've got more of a serious thing, and like you need to make some choices potentially,
Mm-hmm.
based on
Yeah,
how
and your
effective you
desire,
are.
right? Like where you want to take the business. Like if you're
Exactly.
good, then maybe you're good. But if you have
Yeah.
aspirations, then a partnership
a hundred
like
percent. a
makes
hundred percent.
sense. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. How about for the like when it's all successful, like when it all comes together, you're jamming, you're doing all the good things. Like how have you seen, or like what's your hope that like a business owner, like paint the picture, like how are they feeling? What's their like business? It's gonna be rainbows, but no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like what does it look like when it comes together?
I mean, well, I would say like the best case scenario would be for like a business to like graduate from like having like from having us to like
Yeah, true.
requiring somebody who's like full time, like either
Mm-hmm.
controller or like full time CFO in the business. Because like we work with businesses like that are in this kind of like early growth, maybe sort of like
Mm-hmm.
teenage years from a growth standpoint. I'm just thinking of like revenue numbers from like basically
Yeah.
500,000 to 5 million, but like once you're north of that, you can start to like partner with people on a more consistent basis. So anyway, best case scenario would be to sort of like
I love it.
execute on so much potential in our work together that like now you're grown up, kind of thing, all grown up.
You're alumni. There's the Aardvark
Yeah,
alumni
exactly.
group.
Yeah. But I think the other sort of like more rewarding stuff that we see on a regular basis is just like people starting to like incorporate a perspective that we've been um emphasizing, like on
Hmm.
their own, without our direct
Yeah,
perspective.
right.
Like that's really great.
Yeah, I imagine like the growth and just like I think that a lot of founders and owners, like they have those worries that keep them up at night that are really questions or like
Yeah.
unknowns. And from what I can tell, like the work that you're all doing is like shining light, like you said, a flashlight
Yeah.
on some of those things where it's like maybe the numbers aren't where you want them to be, but at least they're visible, right? And
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
understand them. I think that takes a weight off of people, which I think is
The
really
other version of that
interesting.
is like feeling like to the owner that the thing that they have to do, or that the most impactful thing that they could do to drive the business, is just like finding more work. Like
Right.
if we kind of have everything else, like if they're feeling
Love that.
safe with everything else that we're handling, and like
Hmm.
that just becomes like the need, then that's another like sort of
Huge.
win.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
I love it. I love it. Let's end on the win. That's so good. I
cool.
love this
Agreed.
conversation. I guess I have one more question, which is like, how do folks learn more about Aardvark and all the great stuff that you all do?
Yeah, we're our website is heyaardvark.com, Hey, and then the normal spelling of the animal.com. And
Love it.
and then we're on LinkedIn, we've got an Instagram post, but our website is where you can learn most about us.
Yeah, some great videos and articles there that I've been reading, brushing up.
Great.
Love it.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie, for this great conversation. Viewers, thank you all for joining us as well.
Thanks,
For
Sam.
more great ideas, yeah, check out heyaardvark.com. You can also check out businessdesignschool.org. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Bye.